Well, the European Commission admitted recently that it has been using EU funds that were supposed to fight climate change for financing left-wing NGOs and climate organizations with the aim of silencing the voices of conservatives in this secret influence operation. The EU LIFE program was supposed to be, doing what they say, fighting climate change, but instead they were financing left-wing NGOs, non-governmental organizations and climate organizations. And now they've said, oops, sorry, we're not going to do that again. Do we believe them? Well, Ralf Schollhammer joins us from Austria. He is the host of the Hammer Time Show on YouTube and an expert on European politics. Ralf, I know you're so surprised, right? So surprised.
And a personal friend of the show, I was recently told. I think that's very important to mention.
We did, in fact. We called you a friend, capital F.
Yes. Friend of the show. Friend of the show.
No, that makes me, that filled me with a lot of joy and a lot of pride. So I'm very grateful that I always have the occasion to speak to you and your audience. I'm truly grateful. Yeah, it is not a surprise, but it's even more insidious than this, because let's just look at the amount over the last 7 years. We are talking about 7 billion euros. I think that's around $9 billion if I got the exchange rate approximately right. So these are vast sums. And by the way, just as a comparison, I think it was about a small amount in the millions. That is the reason that Marine Le Pen has, for now at least, been banned from running for the presidency in France, where she, according to polls, would be the front runner and most likely to win. So you see again these. There is democracy and then there's democracy in Europe. But what is even more insidious is, so you had this kind of game that was being played. So the European Union gave money to these NGOs. These NGOs were then writing reports that the climate catastrophe is nigh and the world is going to end tomorrow. And then these reports that were funded by the EU were used by the EU to justify their climate policies and all the things that pretty much established a contact between EU and I, right? Anti-nuclear, net zero, all the green madness that we've been talking about for years. So this has been a circle industry that was very lucrative for all of those involved. And of course, everybody who was involved was in one way or another in touch or related to, or, in a personal or professional capacity, very close to Europe's left-wing parties. So it's not a surprise. I'm very relieved in the sense that this is slowly but surely coming to the surface. But I hasten to add, it is not so different from what the Trump administration has uncovered regarding US aid. I mean, just to give you an example, one person that I'm sure that many of you American listeners are familiar with that got millions out of the US Agency for International Development was Bill Kristol. And I think Bill Kristol lives within the closer urban or suburban area of Washington, D.C. I mean, how much of U.S. aid money for international development actually left the Beltway? So these have all been slush funds for close to government or close to EU institutions. And what they built is not so much a deep state. I would say it's actually a shadow state that constantly exists next to whoever is in government. And this brings me to a point that I've been making on your show many times. There has been, in the past at least, a difference between in office and being in power. And the right sometimes was in office, but the left always was in power. And I'm very happy to see that under Donald Trump, this appears to change. Donald Trump is not going to be perfect, right? Every man is flawed, every individual is flawed. But I think in these areas, he's moving very much in the right direction. And apparently it's contagious in a good way, also in Europe, that now we find these things out and that they have been brought to daylight.
But can we just reiterate how this has made Europeans' life worse? So while they're doing this and pumping you with these BS studies that they funded in order to continue to raise money, it's such a grift. Europeans have gone without. We've covered the Dutch farmers. Many of them put out of business, the livestock farmers. We've talked about how many building projects don't get off the ground because of, we have to make a new rule because we have a new project. It goes way beyond just you need a slow flow shower now, but actually Europeans have been asked to live with less because of this.
Well, and can I just say, Ralph, also it's intentional. It's intentional, right? This is an intentional destruction of Europe. We had Christine Anderson on the show, Member of Parliament from Germany, just the other day, and she said, yeah, this is an intentional strategy to bring down, and it's all part of this sort of globalist agenda, is it not?
Well, give us some more examples of like the way that you see that you butt up against walls trying to live in Europe against these brick walls that have the facade of green climate intention.
Well, if you go back to what you just mentioned, for example, one of the movements that started it all, the Dutch farmers, which I think are always a very good example of this. The problem we have is not so much that there's a globalist elite. I would argue, and I'm happy to have a conversation, a discussion about this, that to some extent, elites are always somewhat universal and somewhat globalist, right? The jet setters and all. I think this has always been the case. That is not so much the new phenomenon of the contemporary elites. I think what makes them different is that so many of the causes that they nail to their mast are directly opposed to the interests of a majority of the people. We have what Rob Henderson is calling luxury beliefs, which are the beliefs that the elites hold, but they are, as the term says, they are luxury, and they are rich enough and they can shield themselves from the consequences of their own ideological leanings. But of course, the majority of the people is paying quite literally, but also metaphorically, a very high price for it. I mean, take the issue of migration, for example. I mean, the Europeans, and I would say also the Americans, have been opposed to mass migration since the 1980s. This is not a new phenomenon. And the elites more or less stuck the thing into their ear, said, nah, we cannot hear you. And everybody who's against mass migration is a Nazi or a fascist or an extreme right-winger. And it made them feel good about themselves. And I think this is one of the main things that drives the globalist movement. It is not so much their financial interests, because all of them are very rich already. It is more this kind of messiah complex, if you want, right? This idea, how can you feel good about yourself? And that is if you promote policies that are horrible for the working class and for the middle class, but if you're rich enough to afford it, then you can do it. And I think this is the big issue we have with this, what I call the status quo elites, because we see now that there is, people want change, so they vote for parties that could cause change. Trump in the United States, Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, the Freedom Party in Austria. But what they do now is, on the one hand, they weaponize the judicial system. And the other thing they do quite openly is, as we saw in Romania, they simply annul or cancel elections if the result is not what they're hoping for. And they do it ever more blatantly. But let me say one more thing, because I don't want to monologue for too long. But there is this most recent cover page of The Economist that, in seriousness, says it's a picture of the Statue of Liberty that has moved to Europe, because Europe is now the land of the free and the land of freedom. Europe is now a continent where
that's like a cartoon.
It is. I mean, you can no longer take this. I was always giving them the benefit of the doubt, because I'm generally positively inclined towards humanity, which is getting more and more difficult. But they really believe that stuff. I mean, to give you one quick example, recently police accosted a man in the United Kingdom who was saying that people in England should speak English. Oh my God, the horror, right? You had somebody in Germany making a meme, a pretty funny one, a meme about the Minister of the Interior holding up a sign saying, "I hate freedom of speech." He was now sentenced to 7 months in prison. And I can go on and on and on. There are examples after example after example. And then you have a magazine like The Economist saying, Europe, land of the free. Yes, if you go with the program. But you could also say, well, if you were a Bolshevik, then the Soviet Union was the land of the free, right? And if you happen to be an Aryan and not a Jew in Nazi Germany, you could say it was the land of the free. We're moving more and more, I think, into the farcical and satirical part of this. But it's frustrating, because a new world would mean that those who are in power now would have to give up that power. And as we can see, they do everything they can to prevent, or they do everything they can to avoid giving up power.
Yeah. I mean, The Economist is perfect to lining your birdcage with. It's like, liberal drivel. I mean, you had Keir Starmer in the White House just a few weeks ago, face to face with J.D. Vance, when J.D. Vance, vice president, called him out about clamping down on freedoms in England. And he lied right to his face, saying that that's not happening. But that's what these leaders are doing. And that's exactly, they know it's happening and they're championing it.
But Article 11 of the EU Charter still does allow for freedom of expression. So why can someone arrested in Germany not appeal to an EU court? What happens there? Or are they just they need to take an eraser to that?
They tried. For example, the candidate in Romania was appealing to the European court because he argued justifiably so. What happened to him was illegal, was unjustified. And the European court just said, no, this is not our jurisdiction. They just pretty much cleaned the hands of it. You're absolutely right. And the problem we have in Europe, as you have it in the United States, is that there is an activist or an ideological judiciary. I mean, it's completely absurd to claim that when we all know that particularly in the universities, students are marinated and indoctrinated into a certain worldview, that this would not also apply to people who study law and then become, lawyers, judges, and what have you. And this is precisely what you see in Europe. And the worst thing is that they're ideologically indoctrinated to say that whenever you do this, whenever you prevent democracy from actually, doing what democracy does, meaning getting new people into power, giving new people in charge, they say you can't allow this to happen because then you risk democracy. So we have to save democracy. And what Keir Starmer does, Keir Starmer is, and I say this without trying to be hyperbolic, I think he is, in a way, maybe not a totalitarian, but he's definitely an authoritarian. What is happening in the United Kingdom, it's not as bad in the UK, it's not as bad in France, it's not as bad in Germany. What is happening in the UK is basically that this is no longer a country that has freedom of speech. If you can get arrested, if you can get accosted, if you can get intimidated by the police for voicing your opinion, you do not have freedom of speech. If you have legal constructs like non-criminal hate incidents where the police can accost you even though you did not commit a crime, you are no longer a free country. You are trying to intimidate the people because that's the goal. It's as Mao said, punish one, educate 1,000. And this is what they try to do in the UK and other parts of Europe.
Ralph Scholhammer, always a voice of reason in Europe. Thank you for holding truth to power over there. We really appreciate it. Ralph, great to see you as always. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.